What if the person you trusted the most wasn't who you thought they were? Imagine waking up every day next to your beloved spouse, only to discover that the man you shared your life with was not your husband, but his twin brother. How long could someone keep such a dark secret? And what happens when the truth finally comes to light? Stay with me as we unravel a tale of deception, love, and shocking betrayal. She had always believed her husband was the perfect man. From the moment they met, she felt an undeniable connection, a love so deep that it seemed unbreakable. He was kind, attentive, and knew her better than she knew herself. Their love story was one that people admired. Friends often commented on how lucky she was, and she felt it too. Every morning, she woke up beside the man who had promised to love and protect her forever. But lately, something felt off. At first, it was small things, little details that didn't seem important on their own. The way he hesitated before answering questions about their past, as if he was struggling to recall shared memories. The way he hugged her, holding her just a little too tightly, or sometimes not tightly enough. She noticed that his laughter was different, hollow, forced, as if he was trying too hard. She dismissed it. After all, they had been together for years. People changed, didn't they? Maybe he was stressed. Work had been demanding, and he barely spoke about it. Whenever she asked, he brushed it off, giving vague answers. "It's nothing," he'd say, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my plate." Still, doubt crept in. He used to wake up before her, gently nudging her with a soft kiss on her forehead before heading to the kitchen to prepare coffee, just the way she liked it. Now, she often woke up before him, watching his face as he slept. There was something unfamiliar about him, something she couldn't quite place. Then, there were the habits. He suddenly developed a liking for spicy food when he used to hate it. He started using his left hand more often, even though she knew he was right-handed. He forgot their little inside jokes, the ones that had once been the foundation of their bond. When she mentioned them, he either laughed nervously or changed the subject. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, she rested her head on his shoulder, expecting the usual comforting scent of his cologne. But the scent was different, subtle but different. Her heart skipped a beat, and she pulled back slightly, glancing up at him. He noticed and asked, "What's wrong?" She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Nothing," she lied. But in her heart, something was terribly wrong. The unease grew with each passing day. One night, as she folded laundry, she picked up one of his shirts and hesitated. It wasn't his usual brand. It was slightly different, not just the fabric but the size. She held it up against one of his old shirts and felt her stomach drop. The difference was barely noticeable, but it was there. She tried to push the thoughts away. She told herself she was being paranoid, but deep inside, a storm was brewing. The breaking point came when she found an old photo album buried at the back of their closet. She hadn't looked through it in years. As she flipped through the pages, a wave of nostalgia washed over her, memories of their wedding, their honeymoon, their early years together. Then she stopped. There, in one of the pictures, was a detail she had never noticed before. Her husband had a faint scar just above his eyebrow, a scar he had gotten as a child. It had always been there. It was a part of him. She glanced over at him, sitting across the room, reading a book. Her eyes locked onto his face. Her breath hitched. The scar was gone. Her hands trembled as she closed the album. She looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly, she felt like she was staring at a stranger. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was not her husband. But if he wasn't, then who was he? She had no idea that the man sleeping beside her every night was not her husband. He had slipped into her life so effortlessly, seamlessly playing the role of the man she had loved for years. But he wasn't him. It all began with a plan, dark, calculated, and executed with chilling precision. Her husband had a twin brother, a fact she had always known but never thought twice about. The two brothers had grown apart over the years, their relationship strained by rivalry, jealousy, and wounds that had never healed. She had met the twin only once, briefly, at their wedding. Even then, something about him had felt unsettling. He had smiled, but his eyes held something else, something unreadable. And now, he was standing in place of her husband. But why? That was the question. What could drive a man to steal another's life? It wasn't money, Her husband wasn't extraordinarily wealthy. It wasn't status. Her husband wasn't famous or powerful. So what was it? Perhaps it was something far more sinister: obsession. From the moment her husband had found happiness, his twin had resented him. He had watched from the shadows as his brother built a life he believed he deserved. And now, he had taken it for himself. The deception had been carefully planned. He had studied his brother, memorized every detail, his mannerisms, his speech patterns, his daily routines. He knew which side of the bed his brother slept on, how he took his coffee, the way he placed his hand on his wife's lower back when they walked together. He had practiced these details for months, maybe years, waiting for the perfect moment. And then one day, her husband was gone. The twin had taken his place without hesitation. He walked into their home, slipped into their bed, and kissed her as though he had always been there. He played the role so well that even she, the woman who knew her husband better than anyone, had failed to recognize the difference at first. But deception is never perfect. No matter how carefully constructed, lies always leave cracks. He had made mistakes, subtle ones at first. Forgetting old jokes, misremembering memories, showing interest in things her husband never cared about. She had noticed, but she had ignored the signs, convincing herself that people changed. But deep down, something had felt wrong. And now, those tiny cracks were widening. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she casually mentioned an old friend of his, someone he had grown up with. She had expected him to smile, to recall the same memories she did. Instead, he hesitated, his expression briefly clouding with uncertainty before he forced a laugh. "Oh yeah, him. I wonder what he's up to these days." It was a small slip, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Her real husband would have known. Then there was the matter of the scar. The scar that had always been there, the one she had kissed countless times, the one she had traced with her fingers as they lay in bed. It was gone. No amount of stress or change could erase a scar. And that's when she knew this man wasn't her husband. But what could she do? She couldn't just accuse him. If he had gone to such lengths to take her husband's place, then he was dangerous. If she confronted him too soon, she didn't know what he might do. She had to be careful. She started watching him more closely, studying him the way he had studied her husband. Every movement, every expression, every hesitation. She noticed how he flinched ever so slightly when she touched the back of his neck. Was that an old injury her husband never had? She noticed how he avoided talking about certain people or events, as if afraid of slipping up. She noticed how, late at night, when he thought she was asleep, he would stare at the ceiling, his face blank, lost in thought. And then there were the phone calls. Late one night, she woke to the faint sound of whispering. Carefully, she turned in bed, just enough to see him sitting on the edge of the mattress, his back to her, speaking in hushed tones. "No, she doesn't know. I'm sure. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Her blood ran cold. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by keep this up? She closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she had to do something, but she needed to be smart. If she acted recklessly, she might never uncover the full truth. The real question was, where was her husband? Because if this man had taken his place, then that meant her real husband was out there somewhere. And she had to find him before it was too late. She sat there, frozen. The words she had overheard last night still echoed in her mind. "No, she doesn't know. I'm sure. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." She had barely slept. Her mind raced with questions, doubts, and a fear so deep it made her stomach churn. Who had he been speaking to? And what exactly was he keeping up? But most of all, where was her real husband? Morning arrived too soon. The man she had shared her life with for years, her supposed husband, greeted her with a warm smile, just like always. But now, that smile sent a chill down her spine. How had she not seen it before? The unfamiliar expressions, the slight hesitation in his words, the way he had forgotten the small things that made their love unique. She forced herself to act normal, to smile back as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Pouring him a cup of coffee, she casually said, "I had the strangest dream last night." She watched him carefully as she stirred her spoon in slow circles. "I dreamt that you weren't you." For just a fraction of a second, she saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes. Panic, maybe? A moment of fear? But then, just as quickly, he laughed it off. "That's a strange dream," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "Maybe you've been watching too many mystery shows." But she wasn't laughing. She had to be sure. She needed proof. That afternoon, while he was in the shower, she moved quickly. She went to his closet, searching through his belongings, trying to find something, anything, that didn't belong. The clothes were his, the shoes were his, but something felt wrong. Then, in the back of the drawer, she found a small leather-bound notebook. Her heart pounded as she opened it. At first, the handwriting seemed familiar. It was his, but it wasn't. It was slightly off, like someone trying to imitate another script. As she flipped through the pages, her breath caught. It wasn't a diary, it was notes. About her. She read the words, horror creeping over her like a shadow. Favorite breakfast: omelet, toast, no butter. Left side of bed. Likes window open even in winter. Calls me love when tired. Expects the same back. Do not mention trip to Italy. She remembers details. Her hand trembled as she turned the pages. Page after page, details about her daily life, her habits, things only her real husband would know. And then, near the end, a line that made her stomach drop. If she suspects, act natural. Her breath came in short gasps. She clutched the notebook to her chest, feeling her pulse thunder in her ears. This wasn't just some strange mistake. This was real. Someone had been studying her, observing her every move, memorizing her husband's life, and living it. The sound of the shower stopped. Panic surged through her. She shoved the notebook back into the drawer, quickly smoothing over the clothes. She barely made it to the other side of the room before he stepped out, towel around his waist, smiling at her. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Just looking for my sweater," she lied, forcing a chuckle. "I thought I left it in here." He stared at her for a moment too long, as if trying to read her mind. Then he shrugged. "You always misplace things," he said lightly, walking past her. But she felt it. The shift in the air. He knew she was doubting him. And now she was in danger. That night, she barely spoke, afraid that if she opened her mouth, the fear and anger inside her would spill out. Instead, she planned. She had to find out where her real husband was. She had to get proof that this man was an imposter. And most importantly, she had to get out. She waited until he was asleep. His breathing deepened, his body still beside her. Slowly, she slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. Heart hammering, she tiptoed out of the bedroom, grabbed her phone, and made her way downstairs. She hesitated. Who could she call? The police. What would she say? "My husband isn't my husband," sounded insane. She needed something solid, someone who would believe her. Then, a thought struck her, her husband's best friend. He would know. He would notice the difference. Hands shaking, she scrolled through her contacts and pressed the call button. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then a groggy voice answered. "Hello." She swallowed hard. "It's me," she whispered, glancing toward the staircase. "I need your help." A pause. "What's wrong?" She gripped the phone tighter. "I don't think the man sleeping upstairs is my husband." Silence. Then, a slow, cautious voice. "What do you mean?" She explained everything. The little changes, the forgotten details, the missing scar, the notebook. With every word, she felt herself unraveling, the fear taking over. And then, his next words made her blood freeze. "Where are you now?" "In the living room," she whispered. Another pause. Then he said in a low, urgent tone, "Listen to me carefully. You need to get out of that house. Now." A shiver ran down her spine. "What? Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said, "your husband's twin brother died 3 years ago." The phone slipped from her fingers. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she turned, eyes darting toward the stairs. And then she saw it, standing at the top of the staircase, staring down at her with cold, unblinking eyes. He knew. He had been watching. And now, there was nowhere to run. Her breath caught in her throat. The man at the top of the stairs, the man she had shared her life with, the man she had trusted, was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. Cold. Empty. Like all the warmth he had ever shown her was nothing more than an act. She was frozen, her mind screaming at her to move, to run, to do something. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew the truth. Her voice trembled as she finally managed to speak. Who are you?" His expression didn't change. For a moment, he just stood there, the dim glow from the hallway casting eerie shadows across his face. Then, slowly, he started walking down the stairs, step by step, deliberate, measured. "Is that really what you want to know?" he asked, his voice smooth, eerily calm. "After all this time?" She clenched her fists. "I spoke to him," she said, forcing herself to stand tall. "I spoke to my husband's best friend. He told me," her throat tightened, "he told me your twin brother died 3 years ago." He stopped. For the first time, something flickered across his face, something unreadable. Then he smirked. "Is that what he told you?" He tilted his head as if amused. "Then I suppose I should be dead, shouldn't I?" Her stomach churned. "Where is my husband?" she demanded, her voice stronger now. "What did you do to him?" He let out a quiet chuckle and took another step closer. "You still don't get it, do you?" His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "You've been living with me for months, and you still don't know who I am?" Her breath hitched. No, it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. He watched the realization dawn on her face, his smirk widening. "That's right," he said softly. "There was never a twin brother. It was always me." Her knees nearly buckled. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not true. You had a twin. You told me. I told you what I wanted you to believe." His voice was almost gentle, as if explaining something to a child. "You fell in love with the version of me I wanted you to see. The husband you thought you knew was never real." She shook her head violently. "You're lying," she shouted. "Am I?" He took another step, and she stumbled backward, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Think about it," he continued. "Every time you looked at me and thought something was different, every time you questioned the little things, that was me. The real me. And you never even noticed." Tears burned her eyes. Her whole world was unraveling before her. If this was true, if her husband had never existed the way she thought, then who had she married? Who had she given her heart to? And worse, what had he done to the real man she thought she knew? She forced herself to breathe, to think. If he had lied about everything, if he had spent years playing a role, then he was dangerous. And if he knew that she had figured him out, she needed to get out. Slowly, she shifted her weight, her eyes darting toward the door. It was only a few steps away. If she could make it outside, if she could run, scream, get help. His voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. "Don't even think about it." She looked up, and her blood ran cold. He was still standing there, but his expression had changed. Gone was the charming, careful mask he had worn for so long. In its place was something terrifying, something completely unhinged. "You're not leaving," he said simply. "Not now. Not ever." Her pulse skyrocketed. She had to move. Now. In a split second, she turned and bolted for the door. But he was faster. Before she could reach the handle, she felt his hand wrap around her wrist, yanking her back with brutal force. She gasped, struggling, but his grip was iron tight. "Let me go!" she screamed, twisting, kicking, anything to break free. But he just pulled her closer, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "Why are you running, love? I thought we were happy." A sob caught in her throat. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She dug her nails into his arm, clawing at his skin, and for a moment his grip loosened. It was all she needed. With everything she had, she wrenched herself free and stumbled backward. Without hesitation, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass vase, and hurled it at him. The crash was deafening. He staggered, cursing as shards of glass exploded around him. This was her chance. She sprinted for the door, her fingers fumbling desperately with the lock. Behind her, she heard him moving, recovering. "Honey!" his voice called, still eerily calm despite the chaos. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She yanked the door open and ran. The cold night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. She ran barefoot across the pavement, down the street, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. Lights blurred past her as she screamed for help. A car screeched to a stop beside her. A man jumped out, her husband's best friend. "Get in!" he yelled. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the car, slamming the door shut just as she saw a dark figure emerge from the house. He stood there watching her. Even from a distance, she could see the look on his face, calm, composed, but with something else behind it. Something terrifying. Something that told her this wasn't over. As the car sped away, she gripped the seat, gasping for breath. The nightmare wasn't just that she had been living with a stranger. The nightmare was that he was still out there, and he would come back for her, because he always had a plan. And this time, she didn't know if she could escape.